There are new bombshell claims today from royal insiders who say King Charles's cancer is incurable and he will likely die with the disease.
What if the most powerful throne in the world was quietly on the edge of collapse, and no one in the palace was ready to admit it out loud? Whispers are now spreading through royal circles that King Charles is no longer able to continue as monarch, with insiders describing a moment that reportedly changed everything behind closed doors. A single sentence, "I can no longer serve," is said to have frozen an entire room inside the palace, not as a statement, but as the beginning of something far more serious. According to unnamed palace sources, what followed was not just emotional tension, but the quiet activation of secret succession plans that have never been publicly discussed before. William, Camilla, and Princess Anne are all reportedly caught in a silent struggle where duty, family, and the future of the crown are colliding at once. And now the biggest question remains, is this the beginning of an official abdication, or the most controlled royal crisis in modern history? Inside the walls of Buckingham Palace, silence is never just silence. It is strategy, it is control, and sometimes it is the sound of history changing direction without warning. For decades, King Charles waited for the crown. He prepared for it, studied it, and lived beside it long before it officially reached him. But according to insiders close to royal operations, what no one expected was that the weight of the crown would become heavier than the man who finally received it. Sources claiming knowledge of private palace discussions suggest that recent health concerns surrounding the king have forced senior advisors to quietly review constitutional procedures that are rarely ever activated. These are not public conversations. They are emergency frameworks designed for moments the monarchy hopes will never arrive. And yet, according to these claims, that moment may already be unfolding. It reportedly began behind closed doors during what was described as a routine high-level briefing. Nothing unusual on paper, no public announcements, no cameras, just a meeting that was supposed to focus on ongoing royal duties and upcoming state responsibilities. But insiders say the atmosphere shifted the moment King Charles allegedly paused mid-discussion. Those present describe a moment of unusual stillness, where even experienced royal aides reportedly sensed that something had changed. Not politically, not ceremonially, but personally. Then came the sentence that, according to these accounts, changed everything. "I can no longer serve." Whether spoken as emotion, exhaustion, or formal intention remains unconfirmed. But the impact, according to palace insiders, was immediate. The room reportedly did not respond at first, not because they did not hear him, but because they understood the weight of what such a statement could imply. In constitutional terms, a monarch stepping back is not a simple resignation. It is a structural event that affects government continuity, national stability, and the future of the entire institution. This is where the idea of abdication enters the conversation. Abdication, in royal terms, is the voluntary decision of a monarch to leave the throne before death. It is rare, sensitive, and historically loaded with consequences that extend far beyond the royal family itself. Britain has not seen a modern abdication on this level since Edward VIII in 1936, a decision that reshaped the monarchy forever. Now, according to these unverified internal narratives, the palace may once again be forced to confront that possibility. What makes the situation even more complex is the reported involvement of multiple senior royals in separate briefings. Prince William, as heir to the throne, is said to be receiving increasing levels of confidential preparation material. These materials, often referred to in constitutional planning circles as continuity briefings, outline exactly how authority transitions if a reigning monarch becomes unable to continue. At the same time, Queen Camilla is reportedly facing a very different reality behind palace doors. While publicly maintaining composure, insiders describe her position as emotionally strained, caught between personal loyalty and institutional responsibility. if changes in leadership accelerate, her role would not simply shift, it would be redefined entirely. And then there is Princess Anne, known for her discipline and direct approach to royal duty, and is often described as one of the most constitutionally aware members of the royal family. According to these claims, she has been involved in private advisory conversations aimed at ensuring that if any transition occurs, it happens in a controlled and stable manner. Stability, after all, is the monarchy's most important currency. But behind all of this structure and planning lies something more fragile: human emotion. Reports suggest that Prince William is increasingly aware of the emotional weight building around him. While he is trained for the role of future king, there is a significant difference between preparation and acceleration. One is expected, the other is forced by circumstance. Insiders claim that William is not only focused on succession procedures, but also deeply concerned about the condition and well-being of his father. Because at the center of this entire situation is not just a crown, but a man who has spent his entire life waiting to wear it. This is where the palace narrative becomes deeply divided. On one side, there is institutional necessity, the need to ensure continuity, stability, and public confidence. On the other, there is personal reality, a family navigating illness concerns, emotional pressure, but even the existence of such discussions creates tension inside the institution. Because in the monarchy, perception is power. If the public begins to believe that a transition is near, the monarchy must respond carefully without creating instability, panic, or speculation that cannot be controlled. This is why every gesture, every meeting, and every appearance becomes significant. And it is also why silence inside the palace often speaks louder than official statements. As these reports continue to circulate, one question now dominates every layer of discussion. Is this a temporary period of caution, or the beginning of a historic shift in the British monarchy? Because if even a fraction of these claims are true, then what is happening behind palace doors is not just about King Charles. It is about the future shape of the crown itself. And that future, according to insiders, may be arriving sooner than anyone expected. As uncertainty deepens inside the palace, the structure of royal life reportedly begins to shift in ways that are not visible to the public, but deeply felt by those inside it. According to insider claims, the early signs of transition are not announced with speeches or ceremonies. They begin quietly through changes in access, scheduling, and communication chains that only senior members of the institution fully understand. One of the most significant developments allegedly taking place is the gradual increase in Prince William's exposure to high-level state briefings. These are not ceremonial updates or routine reports. They are detailed constitutional and operational briefings that prepare an heir for the possibility of assuming full sovereign duties at short notice. Sources suggest that William's calendar has begun to reflect subtle but important changes. Meetings that once included only advisory summaries are now said to include direct constitutional context. The tone of these discussions, according to claims, is no longer purely theoretical. It is becoming preparatory. At the same time, King Charles is reportedly continuing his duties, but under a noticeably heavier shadow of internal review. Every public appearance is still carefully managed, but insiders describe a growing emphasis on contingency planning behind the scenes. This does not necessarily confirm abdication. Instead, it reflects a monarchy preparing for multiple possible outcomes at once: continuing stability, temporary withdrawal, or permanent transition. And within that uncertainty, tension naturally grows. Queen Camilla is reportedly experiencing one of the most emotionally complex positions in this situation. While maintaining her official role in public, sources describe her private environment as increasingly strained by competing pressures: loyalty to her husband, awareness of institutional demands, and concern over how history may judge this moment. In royal systems, Personal relationships and constitutional responsibilities rarely exist separately. When one shifts, the other is forced to adjust. According to these claims, Camilla is not only facing emotional difficulty, but also a gradual reduction in influence over certain internal discussions. Not as a formal decision, but as a procedural consequence of shifting priorities within the palace. Because when a potential transition is being prepared, access becomes controlled more strictly, and control becomes everything. Princess Anne, on the other hand, is described as playing a very different role in this unfolding situation. Known for her discipline and unwavering commitment to royal duty, she is reportedly one of the key figures ensuring that institutional stability is maintained above all else. Insiders claim that Anne has been involved in conversations focused on what is described as continuity integrity, the idea that no matter what happens at the top of the monarchy, the institution must not appear unstable to the public. In practical terms, this means ensuring that any transition, if it occurs, is seamless, structured, and without visible disruption. But even within this structured environment, emotional reality cannot be fully contained. Prince William, according to insider perspectives, is facing a situation that no amount of preparation can fully normalize. He is not just observing a possible transition, he is emotionally close to the person at the center of it. That creates a conflict that is both institutional and personal. On one hand, he is expected to prepare as a future monarch. On the other, he is still a son watching his father navigate an overwhelming responsibility under increasing strain. Sources suggest that William's focus is not solely on succession itself, but on timing. Timing in monarchy is critical. Too early, and it appears destabilizing. Too late, and it risks institutional strain. This balancing act is reportedly becoming one of the most sensitive issues inside the palace. Meanwhile, internal communication systems within royal administration are said to be operating at a higher alert level than usual, not publicly declared, but internally adjusted. This includes increased coordination between senior advisors, legal constitutional experts, and ceremonial planners. These groups do not act on speculation. They act on probability, preparedness, and precedent. And precedent is what makes this situation so significant. The last time Britain faced a voluntary royal departure of this nature was nearly a century ago. That historical memory still shapes how every decision is made today. It is why caution is extreme, language is controlled, and nothing is officially confirmed until every possible implication has been examined. Because the monarchy does not only manage a family, it manages perception, stability, and continuity of the state itself. As discussions continue behind closed doors, the emotional tone reportedly shifts depending on who is in the room. This overlap is where most of the current uncertainty exists. Reports suggest that King Charles is still actively involved in decision-making, but there is a growing awareness of limits, physical, emotional, and constitutional. Whether those limits will lead to temporary adjustments or a permanent step back remains unclear. But what is becoming clearer, according to these claims, is that the institution is no longer treating this as a distant hypothetical. It is treating it as a live scenario. And that changes everything. Because once a monarchy begins preparing in real time for a transition at the top, even without formal announcement, the entire structure begins to subtly reorient itself around the possibility of change. Prince William's increasing involvement, Camilla's shifting position, and stabilizing influence, and Charles's reported internal struggle all point toward a system under pressure, not collapse, but recalibration. And recalibration in royal terms is never quiet for long. It always leads to a moment where silence finally turns into statement. And when that moment arrives, the world does not ask whether change is happening anymore. It asks how far it has already gone. As the internal pressure continues to build, the situation inside the palace reportedly moves into its most sensitive phase yet, where preparation is no longer just precautionary, but increasingly structured around the possibility of an actual transition. According to insider narratives, this stage is defined by one key shift. Language inside official circles begins to change. Where once advisors spoke in terms of if and in case, the wording now leans toward when certain conditions apply. In constitutional environments, that subtle change is not emotional, it is procedural, and procedural changes are where the monarchy quietly transforms. Prince William is reportedly now receiving more direct involvement in state-level briefings than ever before. These briefings, according to claims, are not symbolic. They include operational details about governance continuity, public communication strategy, and ceremonial sequencing in the event of a sudden shift in leadership. In simpler terms, William is being positioned not just as heir, but as an immediate continuity figure. This does not mean a public announcement has been made. Instead, it reflects a system ensuring that if circumstances change suddenly, there is no disruption in authority or national stability. But behind that structure, the emotional weight continues to grow. Sources close to the narrative suggest that William is increasingly aware that preparation is no longer distant. It is becoming immediate, and that immediacy creates a psychological tension that cannot be resolved through training or protocol alone. Because every new briefing carries the same underlying implication, the timeline may be shortening. At the same time, King Charles is reportedly still performing official duties, but with growing emphasis on controlled workload and carefully managed engagements. Insiders describe a pattern where responsibilities are still being fulfilled, but with increasing reliance on advisory support and contingency alignment. This is not presented as withdrawal, but as adaptation. However, adaptation in monarchy is never neutral. It always signals change in motion. Queen Camilla's position, according to insider claims, continues to evolve under these conditions. While she remains publicly visible alongside the king, her influence within internal discussions is reportedly becoming more limited in areas involving succession preparation. Not due to exclusion in a formal sense, but due to structural necessity. When a potential transition is being prepared, decision-making naturally concentrates around constitutional priority rather than personal proximity. And that shift, while procedural, carries emotional consequences. Camilla is described as navigating a deeply difficult reality, maintaining composure in public while privately processing the possibility that the life she has built around the crown may soon be redefined entirely. And that redefinition is not symbolic, it is practical. Roles, access, and responsibilities all shift depending on the sovereign status of the monarch. Meanwhile, Princess and is reportedly continuing to act as one of the most stabilizing figures in this entire scenario. Known for her directness and constitutional awareness, she is said to be ensuring that every possible transition pathway remains controlled, structured, and aligned with institutional expectations. Insiders describe her role as less emotional and more protective of the system itself. Because from Anne's perspective, the monarchy does not depend on individuals, it depends on continuity. And continuity must remain intact regardless of personal difficulty. Within this environment, King Charles is portrayed as facing one of the most complex decisions of his reign, not because of political pressure, but because of timing, responsibility, and legacy. According to these claims, the core internal struggle is not simply whether to continue or step back, but how any decision will affect both the institution and his son. Because if the king remains despite growing strain, it risks long-term instability. But if he steps aside too soon, it may place unexpected emotional and constitutional pressure on Prince William. This is why timing is described as the most critical factor in all internal discussions. Not power, not ceremony, timing. And timing is rarely controlled by planning alone. It is controlled by circumstance. As the narrative progresses, palace operations reportedly become more structured around dual readiness. This means preparing simultaneously for continuity under King Charles and transition under Prince William. In practice, this creates a system where two futures are being organized at the same time. One represents stability through continuation. The other represents stability through transition, and both must remain invisible to the public until the final moment. Inside this environment, even small procedural changes take on greater meaning. Scheduling adjustments, briefing allocations, and communication pathways all begin to reflect a system preparing for either outcome without confirming either. This is what makes the current situation so sensitive, because nothing has been officially announced, yet everything is being prepared. The palace, according to these claims, is operating in what could be described as a state of controlled readiness. And controlled readiness is one of the most delicate states any constitutional institution can enter. It requires silence externally and precision internally. As the narrative approaches its peak, one final layer emerges, the emotional distance growing between public perception and private reality. To the outside world, the monarchy continues as normal. Engagements, appearances, and official statements maintain continuity. But inside, every layer of the system is reportedly aligned around the possibility of change. And that divergence is what defines this moment. Because in monarchy, the most important shifts do not begin with announcements. They begin with preparation. And preparation, once fully activated, rarely moves backward. It moves forward toward conclusion, transition, and historical definition. Prince William's role continues to expand within that structure. Camilla's position continues to adjust within institutional boundaries. Princess and continues to anchor procedural stability. And King Charles remains at the center of a system quietly preparing for two possible futures. But only one future will eventually become reality. And when it does, the world will not remember the silence that came before it as absence. It will remember it as the moment everything was already changing without being said out loud. What happens next inside the royal family is no longer just speculation. It is a story unfolding behind closed doors, where every decision carries the weight of history. If King Charles truly reaches a point where he can no longer continue, the monarchy will not just face a transition of power, but a transformation that could redefine the future of the crown itself. Prince William's role, Camilla's shifting position, and Princess Anne's steady influence all point toward a moment that could arrive faster than anyone expects. But the real question is not only what the palace decides, it is how the world will react when that decision becomes official. Do you think this is the beginning of an actual abdication process, or just controlled palace speculation being misinterpreted? Drop your thoughts in the comments and join the discussion below. And if you want to stay updated on every major twist, hidden development, and royal update as this story continues to unfold, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the next update could change everything.